Camp starting up next week. It's kind of crazy that that's already upon us here. And we're going to start looking at how the Eagles are going to be able to try to defend this title this season. And they have a legit chance to repeat. I mean, let's look at it and let's look at this team. They have a much better chance than they did back in 2018 when that roster was not nearly as good as I think we thought and maybe hoped it was at the time. I think they have a much better chance to be really good again than they did in 2023 coming off that Super Bowl loss. But I was thinking about this team and how it projects moving forward here. And I think the general consensus seems to be that the concern is on the defensive side of the ball. They've lost players on that side of the ball, pretty much half your starting defense. The offense, for the most part, remains the same. So I get it from that standpoint, but in the end, I disagree. I think when you look at the Eagles this year, I think the concern lies far more on the offensive side than it does on the defensive side. I think the Eagles' bigger worry, the Eagles' bigger concerns are offensively than defensively. And I think if one side of the ball isn't going to live up to their end and isn't going to meet expectations this year, I think it's going to be the offense. And I want to know if you agree to start the show. 215-592-9494. 215-592-9494 is how you get in. Which side of the ball at this point concerns you more with the Eagles going into 2025? Is it the offense or is it the defense? What's the bigger concern? And for me, it's the offense. And I'll explain why. Because my assumption, and who knows, we'll see how it plays out throughout the course of the show, but my assumption is that most people will not agree with this. Mostly based off conversations this offseason we've had with people, and I get it to an extent. The Eagles have lost players on defense, no question about it. They lost Milton Williams, lost Josh Sweat, lost Slay, C.J. Gardner-Johnson, a lot of different faces and a lot of different levels of that defense, to be honest. But I've said consistently, I don't feel like any of the guys that the Eagles lost this offseason on that side of the ball significantly hurt your chances to compete for a championship and have this defense be as good as they were last year. I mean, you lose C.J. Gardner-Johnson, I'll just say right off the top, I think that was a good move. I think C.J. Gardner-Johnson is a guy who we have vastly overrated here because people like his personality. People like the edge that he plays with. I don't think C.J. Gardner-Johnson's that great. I think he is an average safety in the NFL. I think he's going to be a pretty easy guy to replace, to be honest. Josh Sweat, I think we look at fondly because of the playoff run he had, but he was not having an incredible year before that postseason last year. This is the same guy that last offseason nobody wanted. The Eagles had him take a pay cut because they tried to trade him, and they could not trade him last year. Slay, I think, is a legitimate loss because that's the one spot where I don't think you have guys immediately ready necessarily to step in, but I'm confident you've been developing these young corners in your system. I'm confident that you'll find one of these guys, whether it's Ringo, whether it is Eli Ricks, somebody that you've been developing over the last couple of years, I think will step in and be able to replace Darius Slay adequately. The best player you lost is Milton Williams, and you have depth there. You have Moro Jomo, you have Ty Robinson, who people are really high on coming out in this draft as being a guy that can step into that spot, but most importantly, you have Jalen Carter. And I think we've spent so much time this offseason talking about what the Eagles have lost and not enough about what they have and what they still have. You have Jalen Carter, who I think has a legit possibility of this year, his third season in the NFL, being the best defensive player in football. I think that is how good Jalen Carter could be. We did our top 11 voting a few weeks ago. I had Jalen Carter second on my list. Made the biggest, I think the second biggest play in Eagles history, that sack on Stafford. He is a great player. He makes everybody around him better. The Eagles do not get enough credit for bringing Zach Bond back. I know they didn't do a ton of free agency as far as bringing players in from the outside, but keeping Zach Bond was the number one objective this offseason. The Eagles did that. You have Cooper DeJean, you have Quinyon Mitchell, these young phenoms on the back end who are now going into their second year. They're only going to get better. They have another year of experience, another year in the scheme, and that's the biggest part of things. You still have Vic Fangio, in my mind, the best defensive coordinator in football. That was one of the best coaching jobs I've ever seen a coach do last year, what Vic Fangio was able to do with that defense, and now you have a defense that is truly built in Vic Fangio's image. I mean, he had to go on the fly last year. A lot of those guys weren't his players. A lot of those guys hadn't played in his scheme before. Now you have a legitimate chance to mold your defense in Vic Fangio's image. I think you can tell by the way the Eagles drafted, that draft was largely Vic Fangio impacted. Like, he had a massive say in my mind, as far as who the Eagles took, how they're going to slot in this defense. Just look how heavily that draft was weighted into defense. Yeah, and you bring in those rookies. You have Jahad Campbell, who might not be ready at the start of the year. Jahad Campbell is going to play a massive role for this team at some point. And then you look on the other side and you look at the offense. And yes, it's mostly a lot of the same players, aside from Mekhi Becton, which, who knows, could be a big loss. I think you could probably replace him, but Mekhi Becton was great last year. Mekhi Becton was an all-pro guard last year. But let's face it, regardless of what you or I or anyone else thinks of Jalen Hurts, this was a running team last year. This was a team that was 28th in passing in the NFL. It's not going to be able to work that way again. Teams have studied all offseason on how to neutralize Saquon Barkley. Teams have looked at all offseason, how do we shut down this running game? It's not going to work as well every week. I'm not going to say that the Eagles won't be able to run the ball. When you have this offensive line, you have Saquon Barkley, and you have Jalen Hurts as a running threat, you should be able to run the ball effectively. But do I think it's going to be as effective as it was last year? No, I think that's kind of an impossible bar to measure up to. You're not going to be able to lean on the run game. You will need to throw more. And can I say that I am fully 100% confident that the Eagles can win that way, week after week after week? I can't say it fully. Now, I feel a hell of a lot better about it than I did before the championship game in the Super Bowl, because that was one of the big questions all year. And in those two games, the two biggest games of the season, when Jalen Hurts needed to throw effectively for the Eagles to win, he was able to do it. That certainly gives me a lot more confidence than it did before those games. But let's face it, man, 2 games is not a huge sample size. And I can't be fully sure without having seen it. Without having seen, okay, this can be a passing football team. This can be a team that's not going to be as reliant on Saquon Barkley. That's not going to be as reliant on the running game. You're going to need to throw the football more. And let's face it, the biggest thing on that side of the ball, just like I said on defense, the biggest thing is bringing back Vic Fangio, him having another year to mold this defense in his image. You're making an offensive coordinator change. And I thought Kellen Moore did a phenomenal job last year of playing to Jalen Hurts' strengths, playing to this offense's strengths, putting them in positions to be successful week over week. Now, Kevin Patullo steps in, who, by the way, was the passing game coordinator, a passing game that was not great throughout the course of the majority of the season. And it's unfair to just look at the coordinator change and say solely based off that this season is going to go the way 2023 did. I don't know. I don't know how great of a coach, how great of a play caller Kevin Patullo is going to be. But all I know is this is his first time calling plays. He's never done it before. We saw how that went with Brian Johnson in 2023. It wasn't great. I mean, 2023, you look at that season and why that season kind of disintegrated on both sides of the ball. It was the coordinator changes. That is a big deal. That is something that I think will at least affect this offense to a degree, because Kellen Moore, man, he didn't get that Saints job for no reason. Kellen Moore got that Saints job because he did an unbelievable job here last year. And Kellen Moore, regardless of where he's been, whether he's been in Dallas, whether he's been with the Chargers here in Philadelphia, he had really good offenses wherever he went. That's because Kellen Moore is a great coach on that side of the ball. Kellen Moore's a really good play caller. Now, does that mean Kevin Patullo will stink? No. But I think it's hard to expect that this offense is just going to pick up where they left off, that they're going to be clicking on all cylinders from day one. And yeah, when I look at this season, even though you've lost more players on defense, I'm more concerned about the offensive side of it than the defensive side of it. And I want to know if you agree. 215-592-9494 if you want to get in. 215-592-9494. That's how you get in to start the show. I'm more concerned about the Eagles' offense going into this season than their defense. I'm assuming most people will disagree with that, but that's where I am. I think even though you lost the pieces on defense, you have a lot of those young guys coming back. You have year 2 of Vic Fangio. Offensively, you change coordinators. You have a lot of the same players, but I do think there are other challenges that could affect this offense this year, and I want to know how you feel. 215-592-9494. Go to the phones in a few minutes here, but Luke Nichols producing the show today, and I'll ask you, Luke, as we go into this 2025 Eagles season, which side of the ball concerns you more at this point? Is it the offense or is it the defense?
No, it's definitely the defense. I think there's so many more question marks defensively than there is offensively. Now, I'll give you Patullo being nervous about a new offensive coordinator. We've been through this every single year where there's a new offensive coordinator. I wouldn't compare him to Brian Johnson, though. Brian Johnson was at Florida and then came to the Eagles, was on the Eagles coaching staff for 1 year, and then became the offensive coordinator of the team. Kevin Patullo's been in the NFL outside of 1 year where he went to Texas A&M, I think, since 2007. And he's had a ton of different roles. He's in with a ton of different head coaches. So he has the experience that Brian Johnson lacked. But back to the defense. I'm nervous about the defensive line. I get it, we have Jalen Carter, but it's a lot of like, oh, Moro Ojomo looked really good last year. Oh, Ty Robinson was a big steal. Can Nolan Smith continue his play from the second half of the year last year? Jalix Hunt right now is what? The second starting defensive end. He's going to be on that starting defensive line. He's still very raw to that position.
They have Azeez Ojulari. He's a former first-round pick. Don't forget about him. Don't forget about Josh Uche. Had 11.5 sacks in 2022.
My apologies. Let me rework my entire opinion here. But no, and then the cornerback 2 position, you still don't really know. Right now, it kind of feels like it's just being given to Keely Ringo. Has he proven enough so far to just be handed that position? I don't know. Even at safety, you got Reed Blankenship and then who? Sidney Brown, Andrew Makuba. Makuba isn't even signed yet. So even at linebacker, you don't have. You never know. But then at linebacker, you're not going to have Nakobe Dean for how long? So then you have Zach Bond, and then who's going to be right there? Is it going to be Trott? Is it going to be Van Sumeren? Or is he going to be the fullback every single play now? So I'm worried about the defense. I get it. We have Vic Fangio, and he did great last year, and we had an entire draft pretty much for Vic Fangio. But even with all of that, there's still a ton of question marks at every level of the defense. I get it. We have Cooper, DeJean, and Quinion, and Bond, and Jalen Carter, and those guys are great, and that's the core of your defense. You just got to round out the edges here.
Yeah, I got you. And if you want to get in 215-592-9494, which side worries you more going into this season or concerns you more? Because I don't think it qualifies as worry, at this point. But which side concerns you more, the offense or the defense? For me, it's absolutely the offense. And again, to have all those core players at each level of your defense, to me, is a massive deal. Like Jalen Carter, and I was a huge Fletcher Cox fan. I think Fletcher Cox was underrated throughout the majority of his career here. Jalen Carter is already better than Fletcher Cox ever was at any point in his career. And that is not speaking lightly, because Fletcher Cox in 2016, 2017, 2018, he was incredible. He was one of the best defensive linemen in football. Jalen Carter's already better. Zach Bond is coming off of a season where he was a nominee for Defensive Player of the Year and made huge, impactful plays, really in every game, really in every playoff game. And you look at that secondary, Quinion, Mitchell, Cooper, DeJean, what those guys did, they did in their rookie seasons. They did for the first time in their career. You don't think that they're going to get better, that they're going to improve. And with Vic Fangio leading this thing, I just don't really have concerns about the defense. They were so great last year that even with the pieces they lost, I'm not really worried about them stepping in, the guys behind him stepping in, the guys behind the players they lost, and contributing this year. And the offensive side of it, the coordinator change is something that I really don't think we talk enough about. And not just because of what happened in 2023, because we saw what happened with the offense, Brian Johnson, that year. But the league catches up. Like, this is a smart league of coaches who obsess over this. And if you don't think every coach in the NFL, every defensive coach in the NFL who's got the Eagles on their schedule this year, they spent the last 6-7 months, in part, designing ways to make the Eagles do what they don't want to do. And I think it's pretty clear, based on last year, based on the majority of last year, the Eagles would prefer to run the football instead of throw the football. And I think it's a lot for a coach like Kevin Patullo, who doesn't have a ton of experience.